The House will come to order. Members will be at their seats. The clerk has opened the roll, and you may record your presence. Please rise and give your attention to the House chaplain and remain standing for the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Representative Keither.
Let us pray. Almighty God, as the psalmist cried out, I lift up my eyes to the mountains. Where does my help come from? My help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. As we stand before you today, we repent of our dependence on our own power and wisdom and diligently seek your help. May our deliberations reflect your mindfulness and our decisions represent your vision. Help us to live up to your faith and your belief in us. This I pray in Christ's name. Amen.
Not many.
HR also, so just in case that's not something you have in there.
Oh, thanks.
Letting you know, so we're getting an HR in, it's the one discipline thing that order. So it's going to be basically introducing, it's going to go to a special order of business and calendar. So introduce no referral. And then I'll have the manual. We have the, anyway. Right, and then just leave it there. Right, we're not going to do it, but it goes on to a special order of business. Good morning. Good. Thank you. Good morning. Good.
Has every member had an opportunity to record their presence? The clerk will close the roll and record the attendance. Introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill number 2355 by the Committee on Elections, an act concerning elections, clarifying certain election laws. House Bill number 2356 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning civil actions and civil procedure relating to partition, prescribing procedures and requirements for partition of certain real property. House Bill number 2357 by the Committee on Taxation, an act concerning taxation relating to income tax, establishing the Property Tax Relief Act that provides residential property tax refunds, providing for an expiration of the selective assistance for effective senior relief credit and homestead property tax refund. House Bill number 2358 by the Committee on Taxation, an act concerning sales taxation relating to exemptions, defining nonprofit integrated community care organizations and providing an exemption therefore. House Bill number 2359 by the Committee on K-12 Education Budget, an act concerning education finance relating to the Kansas School Equity and Enhancement Act, establishing the non-proficient student weighting.
Just go on. Maybe I'll take Did you move on to?
Introduction of original motions and House resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Resolution number 6009 by the Committee on Appropriations, a resolution disapproving Executive Reorganization Order number 47, renaming the Kansas Department for Children and Families the Kansas Department of Human Services, and abolishing the Kansas Department for Aging and Disability Service, and transferring powers, duties, and functions to the Kansas Department of Human Services.
House Bill 2050 appears on the consent calendar for the third day. Is there objection? Seeing none, it will be advanced to final action. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
House Bill number 2050 by the Legislative Post Audit Committee, an act concerning the Legislative Division of Post Audit, removing the requirement to submit certain documents thereto.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2050. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote.
Finch votes aye. I don't know if you heard him. I don't know if you heard him. Finch votes aye. Yeah, Finch. Yeah.
Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote?
Don't see 10 hands.
Not seeing 10 hands, call is not in order. Representative Bishop votes aye.
Corbett?
Representative Corbett votes aye. Representative Ralph votes aye.
Clark?
Representative Clark votes aye. Representative Thomas votes aye. Representative Helgerson votes aye. Representative Tim Johnson votes aye. Representative Williams votes aye. Has every member had an opportunity to record his or her vote? The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Seeing none, 122 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2050, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Speaker recognizes Majority Leader Hawkins for a motion to resolve into the Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the House resolve itself into the Committee of the Whole for the purpose of considering those items under the heading of General Orders.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The motion carries. The Speaker appoints Representative Sutton to chair the Committee of the Whole.
All right. Good morning, body. Very good. The first item up for business is SB 15. For the purpose of carrying SB 15, the chair recognizes Representative Kelly. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Today, we start out with Senate Bill 15, and it's one for you that have been around. You will have heard most of it before. But as someone who started working for a bank 3 days out of college and still working in the industry today in rural Kansas, it's pretty special for me to be able to present Senate Bill 15 today. And I want to try to keep the presentation to the key points in the interest of our time. Senate Bill 15 is a bill as amended by the Senate Financial Institutions Committee. Our committee in the House also had the exact same bill, and we heard all the amendments that were going to be proposed in the Senate hearing, which was scheduled just immediately after our hearing and when they worked the bill. The bill enacts the Kansas Economic Recovery Linked Loan Program. It's a focused long-term solution to benefit the rural economy, and that is important right now because so much of Kansas is rural, and there are many issues, not only in the urban, but also in the rural areas. This expands the field of membership for the state-chartered credit unions, provides a targeted tax deduction for financial institutions on interest received on ag real estate and rural housing loans, and it begins for tax years after 12/31 of 22. Senate Bill 15 started out as an identical bill to what we had at the end of the session last year, and it passed our chamber 114-3, but was one of the bills vetoed by the governor. This bill, first off, is a compromise, which I believe makes for the best legislation. The tweaks added this year in the Senate and that we heard in the House, I think strengthen the bill and strengthen the compromise. The bill contains two components: provisions that represent a compromise between banking and credit unions. It changes the field of membership for the credit unions to match the federally chartered counterparts. It establishes a targeted tax deduction for banks and savings and loans on the interest income received on agricultural real estate and rural housing, rural being defined as populations 2,500 or less. And the tax deduction mirrors the exemption the Farm Credit System has been granted under federal law. These provisions are important as they will grow competition between lenders across the state of Kansas, allowing all financial institutions to offer more competitive interest rates, and in turn, I think the beneficiary will be our borrowers. The second component is the linked deposit program that is used to fund these loans. Missouri has an $800 million program, Oklahoma $225 million, Iowa $108 million. This will be a $60 million program through the Pooled Money Investment Board, and it's really going to convert a linked deposit program that hasn't had use for a number of years, and it will convert it into this program. The maximum loan amount for any borrower is $250,000, and the Pooled Money Board has no liability. If a loan does not pay out, the bank is obligated for the loan. The Senate added amendments to clarify that these loans, the proceeds of them, have to be used for expenses of business in Kansas. A business can have no more than 200 full-time employees to be eligible. All financial institutions must have at least one branch in the state. And then also, it was in the bill last year, but this year it's there, and the state treasurer will submit a report to the legislature and to the governor on what this program is doing each year, and the rates are recalculated for the borrowers each year. So Senate Bill 15 passed the Senate 39-0. It's a long-term solution designated to help promote business growth, stimulate job creation, and bring confidence back to the rural areas and to the main street of rural areas where I live, and we need a little confidence right now. The fiscal note on the bill is when it kicks in the first year, $2 million. After that, estimated at $3.9 million. The interest rate savings that will go back to borrowers, estimated by what bank and savings and loans have in ag, real estate, and rural real estate, will be about $10 million a year. So there will be a plus going out and coming back into the economy, where they will be paying taxes, where they'll be paying sales tax and all. The bill's supported by a number of non-bank groups, and it's one that we passed handily last year, and I think with some improvements, I think it's even has some pluses to what we passed last year. And I will stop there and be happy to answer any questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Zhu.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to the chair of the committee for speaking so well on this. I don't love every part of this bill, but this bill does represent a lot of good faith negotiations and a lot of good faith compromise on every side. And we see a much better product as a result of this. I do think it does more good than it does bad at this point, and I will be supporting this bill. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would just like to echo the previous representative's comments and say this is a good bill. It's a good compromise, and it really does a lot to help out the economy of the rural areas in my district and many others as well. Thank you again.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Kelly, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports Senate Bill 15 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Kelly to report SB 15 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2103. For the purpose of carrying HB 2103, the chair recognizes Representative Moser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were no committee amendments to this bill. House Bill 2103 establishes a program for addressing, House Bill 2103 establishes a program for addressing pesticide waste disposal. Administered through the Department of Agriculture, it would direct the Kansas Agriculture Remediation Fund Board to move up to $50,000 annually from the Kansas Agricultural Remedial Fund that currently exists to the Pesticide Waste Disposal Fund. This would serve to help address the disposal of pesticide waste that cannot be sold or returned or otherwise used. The bill essentially provides definitions and funding language for this new program within the Kansas Agriculture Remediation Fund statute. By utilizing these funds to safely collect and properly dispose of waste pesticides by professionals, this sector of agriculture continues to practice good industry stewardship regarding the protection of our environment. This is a sound decision to use these funds for this purpose. There were 8 proponents of the bill: Kansas Corn Growers Association, Kansas Sorghum Producers Association, the Kansas Soybean Association, Kansas Association of Wheat Growers, Kansas Farm Bureau, Kansas Grain and Feed, Kansas Agribusiness Retailers Association, and the Kansas Cooperative Council. There were no opponents. There is no fiscal note to House Bill 2103. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and with that, I will stand for questions.
Representative, apparently pesticide disposal is a hot-button issue. If you'll look to the board, you'll see that there are a number of people who'd like to speak to the bill. All right. I think legitimately Representative Carlin would like to ask some questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Welcome to the House, Lisa. Nice job. This was a fun bill, right? I'm rising in support of the legislation. Thank you. Thank you. Good job.
Okay. All right. Representative Humphreys to speak to the bill.
Would the carrier of the bill stand for a couple questions? So this talks about the environment, pesticides, it's funding, agriculture, waste disposal. It seems pretty complicated. And I think there were a lot of people that wanted to ask you about that. Are you willing to speak to all of those people? Sure. I know you are, and this is your first time to carry a bill. We welcome you to the House. We're so happy that you're here, and you did an excellent job explaining it.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Moser, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when committee rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2103 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Moser to report HB 2103 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item up for business is HB 2134. For the purpose of carrying HB 2134, the chair recognizes Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no committee amendments.
Please continue.
I rise before the body to present House Bill 2134, an act to codify the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, the NAIC, credit for reinsurance model regulation into statute, and amend the Kansas credit for reinsurance statute to add another condition under which a ceding insurer is permitted credit for reinsurance. This bill would also amend the Insurance Holding Company Act by requiring the filing with the Commissioner of Insurance of a confidential notice of proposed divestitures or acquisitions and adding definitions among other measures. The measures in House Bill 2134 are required for Kansas to receive accreditation with the NAIC, which is scheduled to take place later this year. The provisions that update the credit for reinsurance statutes are in response to an agreement between the United States and the European Union and a separate agreement between the United States and the United Kingdom. And if we do not enact these according to those agreements, we'll be preempted by the federal government in 5 years. The second part of the bill, which updates the Model Holding Company Act, ensures the Department of Insurance maintains authority over Kansas companies doing business in other states or in other countries. The committee exhaustively reviewed these measures and heard proponent testimony from the Kansas Department of Insurance and the American Council of Life Insurers. There were no opponents. The bottom line on House Bill 2134 body is that it brings our state in line with other states, but it also allows us to receive NAIC accreditation. Without this accreditation, some insurance businesses will choose not to do business in Kansas, and those that do will charge Kansans more for those services. So honestly, this is about saving Kansans money. With the huge burdens our Kansas small businesses are already facing during the digging their way out of the coronavirus economic shutdown, anything that we can do to make it more cost-effective to do business here in Kansas is a good thing. And thank you, Mr. Chair. I stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? Representative Humphreys, is that held over from the last bill? Okay. And Representative Carlin, same thing. Is that held over from the last bill? Okay. You're not getting many takers, Representative Proctor. The chair recognizes Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The carrier of the bill did a great job in explaining what is contained in what looks like a rather thick bill, but it does bring us in compliance with the requirements from NIAC. Also, it changes a couple of definitions in the bill itself, and those are in regard to group-wise supervisor to mean the regular U official authorized to engage and conduct group-wise supervision activities as is acknowledged by KSA 403318. And secondly, the other definition had to do with internationally active insurance group, and the meaning has been changed to an insurance holding company that includes an insurer registered under KSA 403305 and amendments thereto, and that talks about having associations in at least 3 countries and a percentage of their business and premiums for their overall gross written premiums. This also has a companion bill, Senate Bill 28, and so with that, I would encourage you to vote to support this, and thank you very much.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Proctor, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the body rises to report, it reports House Bill 2134 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Proctor to report HB 2134 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2109. For the purposes of carrying HB 2109, the chair recognizes Representative Wahhabism.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There were no committee amendments.
Please continue.
House Bill 2109, colleagues, this is a bill that changes the requirement for Board of Indigent Defense Service appointments. The current law provides that each county with a population of over 100,000 shall have one member of the board, and the board shall be made up of only 5 lawyers and 4 non-lawyers. The bill amends KSA 22-4519 to provide that one member of the board shall be appointed from each county that has a population of over 115 people, and the section that is amended to provide that 6 members shall be lawyers and the 3 members shall be non-lawyers. This bill, we passed this bill last year under House Bill 2449. There were no opponents, there were no neutrals, there was only one proponent, and there was no physical no. With that, I stand for questions.
Right. Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had the opportunity to work on this bill, as I said, on Judiciary, with the good representative carrying this bill. A couple of things that I wanted to point out just to help everybody understand really what the Board of Indigent Defense does. 85% of adult criminal felony cases are handled by bids in one fashion or another. Okay? So we have a constitutional requirement, obviously, that everybody gets counsel when they're involved in a criminal case, and if you can't afford it, that's ultimately what this organization does. Right now, currently, the way that it's written in statute, we have a significant conflict because current law requires we have 6 attorney members on the board, but then we also have current law that says that there can only be 5 attorney members on the board. So where do we fix it? Well, the reality is we know that that the counties are growing, the populations are shifting. As a matter of fact, we're going to go through redistricting for that very reason. And so in an attempt to solve this dilemma and to ensure that the bids board is adequately and appropriately represented, that is why this legislation has come to fruition. You guys might also recognize that we validated the importance of bids when we added a public defender to the Criminal Justice Reform Commission just earlier in this session, or voted to do that. So I would encourage passage of this bill because in contrast, it doesn't expand government. What it ultimately does is it makes sure that the least among us are appropriately and adequately represented in the criminal justice system. So thank you for the opportunity to speak, Mr. Chair.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Wahhabism, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the body rises and report, it reports House Bill 2109 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Wahhabism to report HB 2109 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. And opposed, say nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2121. For the purposes of carrying HB 2121, the chair recognizes Representative Eric Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were committee amendments. I move adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, no. Opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This bill, HB 2121, as amended, would add a definition for absconds from supervision to the Kansas Code of Criminal Procedure. The bill would define the term to mean knowingly avoiding supervision or knowingly making the defendant's whereabouts unknown to the defendant's supervising court services officer or community correctional services officer. The bill would also add a definition of absconded from supervision in a statute related to parole. And it defines the term to mean knowingly avoiding supervision or knowingly making the defendant's whereabouts unknown to the defendant's supervising parole officer, court services officer, or community corrections officer. This bill came to the House Corrections and Juvenile Justice Committee through the Sentencing Commission. They made a recommendation based on a finding by the Supreme Court in a case, State v. Dooley, where the Supreme Court suggested that the legislature come up with a definition and that we would quit borrowing from other states for a definition. We did borrow North Carolina's for that case. Anyhow, so what they did is they took the language that you see in the bill now and sent it to our committee, where we made an amendment to it. They had actually changed the word knowingly to intentionally, and our committee approved an amendment to change it back to knowingly. While that may seem like a small matter, the idea being that knowingly would allow us to deal with an individual who may not have intended to abscond in the end, but that was the outcome. Intentionally means you meant to do the criminal action. And so we went with knowingly, in that it would capture most circumstances where an individual remains gone from oversight by court services officers, parole, and probation. There was no fiscal note attached to this. Prison bed space is nominally affected, and I'll stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As the carrier pointed out, there was extensive discussion of the standard for this matter being either intentional or knowing in the committee. There was also extensive discussion of this in the Sentencing Commission before we sent it over. It was a pretty close vote. I'm still on the side of keeping this as intentional. I think if we make the standard knowingly, it makes it a lot closer to the crime of failure to appear, for which the sanctions aren't as severe. At the knowingly standard, I think it more accurately reflects the Supreme Court decision, and I think it will keep some people from being sent back to prison to finish the rest of their sentences when the other sanctions, intermediate sanctions, are more appropriate. So I'm probably going to vote against it, but for the people in the Democratic caucus, you can vote however you feel. Vote your conscience. Thanks.
The chair recognizes Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the carrier of the bill stand for a few questions? As you will recall, in committee, you brought the amendment that changed it from intentionally to knowingly, as I recall, correct?
That's correct.
And probably much to your surprise, I supported you in your amendment in committee.
To my relief, yeah.
But now, you see, I'm having flip-flop syndrome and second thoughts. So bear with me, because I really don't know how I'm going to end up voting on this. Let's assume that I have an appointment with my court services officer this afternoon down in Wichita, say long about 5 o'clock. I know I'm supposed to be there at 5 o'clock. I get in my car and I start heading for Wichita, and I hit a patch of ice and I go off in the ditch and my car's disabled. I know I'm supposed to be there. I know I'm not gonna be there because I'm in the ditch. Does that put me in violation because I'm knowingly not meeting with my court services officer, even though it was arguably beyond my control that I went out of control and ended up in the ditch?
Well, Representative, I believe that you could argue that, but however, I think the knowingly is more to the intention and the general intention of your actions. If by accident you are not able to make your meeting, that doesn't fit the general intent of absconding, nor does it fit the intent of failure to appear, especially if subsequently you give a phone call to your court services officer and they can qualify that with a police report.
Well, I do appreciate the way you explain that because it does sound good and I can kind of agree with it. Okay. On the other hand, intentionally using that word would clearly mean that in this circumstance, I knew I was supposed to be there at 5 o'clock tonight. I'm not going to be there. I didn't fail to show up intentionally. I went out of control on the roadway and had an accident. And I think that might have been at least the argument that a majority, bare majority, of the Sentencing Commission went with intentional as opposed to knowingly. Is that consistent with what you understand?
So, Representative, I think we're going to wade in the weeds a little bit on legalities when we talk about this, because both knowingly and intentionally, as you well know, are mental states of intention, or intent anyway. And so the intentionally would make it more specific, requiring that your intent was for the final outcome to be absconding, whereas the knowingly provides that it's a general intent, that you knew your actions, not necessarily having an accident, but whatever you do to avoid being under supervision, that those actions would cause or would likely cause the criminal action that occurs.
You know, the concept of degrees of criminal culpability between knowing and intentional is one that perplexes and tortures law students for generations. I suspect probably the same in your profession, that it's hard to figure out what somebody really intended. Can we generally agree with that concept?
Absolutely, and that often becomes the argument.
And that was what prompted, I believe, your amendment, which said, you know, Carmichael can always claim he didn't intend to miss his appointment. And so if we use this further standard of having to show intent, intentional failure to be there, it'd be very difficult to convict a known liar like me, because I would always say, well, I didn't intend to miss my appointment, I just forgot, or had a hangnail, or made up some other excuse. Is that generally the argument for intentional as opposed to knowing?
Well, it is part of it, yes, okay. Absolutely.
Okay. I hate to leave only a part of it said. If there's something else that you need to add, I mean, feel free. I know the clock is ticking, but this is important. There's a lot of people that are affected by it, and the public safety is affected by it.
Absolutely. So what I'm getting at there is when you talk about a person's intent or intentionally, you're also talking about a number of things that can collude that. In other words, keep it from being, let's say an individual is impaired. Finding specific intent by a person who's impaired, which is often the case with an individual who's having a hard time making supervision, whether they are due to drug addiction or alcohol. Intent is one of those things that's going to come up intentionally, whereas knowingly more broadly covers that.
And so just to give the example of that, and then we'll try to wrap this up because I know folks have other business today. If I'm headed down to Wichita for my 5 o'clock appointment and the standard is intentionally not showing up, that'd be against the law, and I decide to stop Emporia, as I have in the past, and consume large quantities of cereal malt beverage all afternoon, and I get drunk as a skunk, then maybe I can't be said I didn't intentionally show up because I'd planned to be there. I just got drunk and couldn't make it. And probably we don't want to let people off the hook in that circumstance.
Right, Representative. In that case, it would be the general intent. In other words, you intended to stop and have some cereal malt beverage, and therefore the general intent applies.
And the moral of the story is don't stop at Emporia and drink beer on the way home. That we can agree on. I have absolutely no idea how I should vote on this, ladies and gentlemen. It's a hard question. There's arguments either way. So I don't know what to do with HB 2121, but I know we got to do something. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Representative Jennings.
The last speaker is right. We do have to do something, and there are always choices, and I'm going to make the choice to support this bill as amended by the committee. You've heard about the Sentencing Commission vote was 7-6, whether it should be intentionally or knowingly. Intentionally won in that vote. The committee was much more decisive in its decision to go ahead and amend this bill. And it seems like the difference here is really small, right? So if you knowingly do something, there's an awareness of what you're doing is wrong versus going out with absolute commitment to doing it wrong. That's kind of the difference here. It's not a huge difference. It is a legal culpability difference, to be sure. But the question becomes is what's the effect? And the effect on this is simply this. If you are found to be an absconder for violating the terms and conditions of your probation, it opens up one more option for the court to use on that breach of terms and conditions. That offender could be sent to prison. Under normal violations of terms and conditions of probation that do not create new crime events and those sorts of things, the court has a duty to utilize what often are called graduated sanctions. This would be a short stay in the county jail might be used in those cases. They couldn't put them into prison. At the end of all of this, we are creating a system whereby instead of precluding the option of going to prison, it becomes permissive and it's judicial discretion. Judges will look at the totality of the facts around these cases and make a decision that is correct given those facts and circumstances. I encourage you to support the bill as amended. Amended by the committee, not amended here.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Smith, you may close.
I think we've said enough on it. I'll just move that when the House rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2121 favorable for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Smith to report HB 2121 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2165. For the purposes of carrying HB 2165, the chair recognizes Representative Delperdang.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. 2165 is from the Committee on Transportation. There was one amendment. Therefore, I move the adoption of the committee report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes and the committee report is adopted. Please continue, Representative.
Last year, on February 26th of 2020, I had the privilege of carrying House Bill 2528. It passed with a vote of 124 to 1. This year, 2165 replaces that bill. Currently, the Kansas statute defines an antique vehicle as being more than 35 years old and as close as possible without any significant alterations to the major components. 2165 only requires the vehicle to be more than 35 years old, regardless of the age of the components installed on the vehicle. Many of the upgrade parts are placed on these older vehicles for safety reasons. Items such as tires, brakes, rotors, axles, glass, etc. Other parts are placed on the vehicle for aesthetic purposes such as chrome, wheels, lights, interior components. And in many cases, the aftermarket parts are placed on a vehicle simply because No original parts are available for the specific thing. Since 1954, there's one feature that is on antique vehicles that cannot be altered under federal law. That feature is known as the VIN number, or the vehicle identification number. That item alone contains the vehicle information, including the year manufactured. In the case of vehicles equipped with the VIN, that item alone needs to determine whether the status of the vehicle is an antique or not. Vehicles manufactured prior to 1954, the year manufacture needs to be the determining factor on it. This bill also brings Kansas in line with many other states that allow antique vehicles to be defined by their age, regardless of the type or age of the equipment installed on the vehicle. With that, I stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Helgerson.
You may remember we had hundreds and thousands of emails about this last year. This year we haven't gotten that many yet. There is a large population of enthusiasts that believe this is not only something they would like to do, but it's also a safety factor for them because they can improve the safety of the cars that they're driving. One thing that's never brought up is, I don't want the Highway Patrol taking the time to stop individuals that are improving the safety of their cars for a hobby. I'd rather them spending the time on a lot of other things they need to spend their time on. I urge you to support the bill.
The chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Would the carrier stand for a question? Do you remember who the one was from last year?
I do, but I'm not allowed to mention names.
Fair enough. Well, in order to make sure that I have a complete understanding of this, I had a couple of questions. What is the value of having an antique license plate as opposed to a standard license plate? So let's say I'm a car collector. I want to replace component parts in my car to make it safe. Why does it matter to me if I'm in that position to have the antique plate as opposed to just a standard license plate?
Can I translate your question? What is the fiscal note? Is that what we're leading to?
For an individual.
For an individual. A lot of them, there's a lot of antique plates out there right now. I think there's 68,444 cars eligible in the state of Kansas. A vast number of that already have the plates on it. But whether I want to put an antique tag on it or a regular tag, that really should be my choice on that. There is, on an antique tag, there's a one-time $40 fee. Then you continue to pay the renewals and the property tax and so forth going on. So I think it's more of a preference. What we're trying to do away with is if you walk in and you decide I want an antique tag, it should be up to you, not the clerk behind the desk there saying, you may or may not qualify. Or it should not be, absolutely should not be, subject to local, county, or state police pulling you over and saying, you got an antique tag on, but you got new tires on there.
Let me try it simpler. Is there a financial incentive for an individual? If they get the antique tag, they will pay less over time, correct?
As I said, it's a $40 one-time fee, and it is a reduced rate. I think $17 per year going after that. If they have a regular tag, it's going to be whatever we're normally paying. So there is a little bit of financial incentive there, yes.
And under this bill, if I have a vehicle that's more than 35 years old, but I use it as my main mode of transportation, let's say I drive it 40,000 miles a year, it still qualifies as an antique, correct? Okay, thank you. Bonnie, I won't belabor the point here, but there's a $1.9 million fiscal note to this bill, and I understand the problem we're trying to solve, but I don't think it's solved by saying that a 1983 Honda Civic is suddenly an antique. I looked up the definition of an antique, and it said a collectible object that has a high value because of its considerable age. Every car before 1985 does not have a high value because of its age. It is not necessarily collectible. In fact, in preparation, I went on Craigslist and looked for some cars from the 80s, and I found I can buy a 1981 Toyota Tercel for $900. I don't think anyone would consider that an antique or a collectible, but if I did that under this bill, I could suddenly get a break that my neighbor does not get on their 1995 car or their brand new car. I'm all for giving an economic advantage to those who are driving lesser or cars that cost less or who need to buy that, but I don't think we should throw around $1.9 million on a whim. It seems to me there are easier ways to do this. If an item is actually an antique, I don't think you're going to be driving it 40,000 miles a year. We could have changed that. So again, I won't belabor the point, but the idea that every car that is more than 35 years old should qualify for a cheaper rate seems to me a blunt instrument trying to solve this problem that we could do a lot simpler. So even if I'm the only one, again, I will be voting no on this bill, and I would encourage you to do the same. We can come back to it and come up with a more precise solution. Thank you.
The chair recognizes Representative Heiberger.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Will the carrier stand for a question or two? Ready? All right. I'm driving a 2001 Toyota Camry right now, so next year, will I be able to license this as a special interest vehicle?
I'm not currently up on the special interest vehicle, where this was a antique tag, so it'd have to be 35 years old, so your 2001 would not qualify as an antique.
I'm looking at Section 2 of the bill.
Where are you at? Special interest vehicle. Okay. That was part of what the amendment was about in the committee, got into hot rods and special interest vehicles and stuff. And I think we tried clearing. Can you hear me? We tried clearing some of that up, but it focused it back on being 35 years or older. Yes, that wording's still in there, but there was an amendment that was run to try and clarify some of that. And I've got it with, if you'd like to see it.
Okay, so to qualify for even though the special interest vehicle has to just be more than 20 years of age, this ties back into the definition of antique. This ties back into the definition of antique somehow. The wording here is that a special interest vehicle is a motor vehicle that is more than 20 years of age and has not been altered or modified.
Okay, if I may. The amendment that happened in there was striking, it was mainly eliminating references to street rods on there. And we changed some statutes, but it was all pertaining to street rods. And it struck through special interest vehicle shall also mean and include motor vehicles manufactured before 1949. So we were focused on 1949 vehicles and beyond as far as special interest.
But that language appears to be struck from the statute, though. I mean, I guess the way I read this, next year I can go register my 2001 Toyota as a special interest vehicle and register it for $26. But if you can tell me otherwise,
Now, there is some other tags for the special interest. There's hot rod tags out there and so forth, but it's a different tag, if you will, which carries a different price guide, if I can refer to it as such.
Okay, thanks.
The chair recognizes Representative Waymaster.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few questions in regards to the bill for the carrier. What this bill does, if I'm reading it right and what we've been discussing, is that if you have any aftermarket parts that are put onto a classic vehicle, then it goes by the age of the vehicle based off of the title and not of when those aftermarket parts were put on the vehicle. Is that correct?
My hearing did not allow. I'm sorry. That's my bad.
Okay, I'll restate the question. What this bill does is it basically just says that if the vehicle is over 35 years of age, it can classify as an antique vehicle regardless of the age of the parts if that vehicle had to have gone through a restoration.
That is correct.
Okay, so that's the only question I have. Thank you. When I was on the Transportation Task Force a couple of years ago, I do have some angst in regards to antique tags. And that's, my father is actually very upset with me on that because he collects classic cars. The reason why I have an issue is I believe the antique tags across the state of Kansas is being abused. Just because a vehicle is over 35 years of age does not stipulate that that is a classic car. And I think the antique tags need to be used for the purpose of a classic car and not just for the age itself. However, I am in favor of this bill. As I mentioned, my father collects classic cars, so does my uncle. There was a situation where my uncle has a 1961 Corvette. It was wrecked. You can't find original parts for a 1961 Corvette. And he had to have aftermarket parts put onto that vehicle in order to restore it. So I'm going to go ahead and support this bill, but there is an underlying issue that we need to address in regards to antique tags and how those are processed throughout the state of Kansas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Delperdang, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, this is a bill that we tried passing through last year. It passed, just a second, I think I told you it passed 124 to 1 last year. Other than that, it's pretty much the same with the exception of the hot rod issues that was brought up on the amendment. There was a little bit of talk on the special interest vehicles, but I was looking, and that's not a part of the statute we are changing right now. That's remaining constant. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to move that when the committee rises and reports, it report House Bill 2165 favorably for passage. Thank you.
You've heard the motion by Representative Delperdang to report HB 2165 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item for business is HB 2074. For the purposes of carrying HB 2074, the chair recognizes Representative Berquist.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There were no amendments in committee. House Bill 2074 deals with insurance industry and a number of different licensures. It updates producer licensing statutes pertaining to appointments, fees, licensing, renewal dates, continuing education, suspension, revocation, and denial of licensure and reinstatement. One, it modifies the definition of biennial due date, as the term applies to both agents and registered businesses. It removes the $5 resident and $2 resident renewal fees for all renewals of the insurance firm and requires each agent to apply for a renewal and pay $4 biennial renewal fee, and projected loss of this in regards to this portion is $5 million in revenue. This was requested by the insurance agency. It modifies continuing education credit requirement for licensed agents to 18 hours per biennial and permits at least 3 hours of instruction in ethics and removes the required insurance agency management hours. Currently, agents are required 12 hours per license, that is held up to 24 hours. Updates to the CEC requirements for specific lines of insurance to add exemptions for insurance agents licensed to hold only a qualification for either self-service storage unit insurance or for travel insurance. It removes affiliation requirements for business entities. On and after January the 1st, 2022, the bill also removes required annual certification and related certification fee for a licensed insurance agent who is an officer, director, partner, employee, or otherwise legally associated with a corporation, association, partnership, or other legal entity appointed by an insurance company. It creates reporting requirements for each person or entity licensed in the state as an insurance agent. Under Commissioner, licenses and renewals, permissible considerations add an item to list of reasons to deny a license renewal and list items to consider when granting or renewing a license. List items to consider with granting previously denied or revoked licenses. Sets time frame of 1 year after a hearing and 5 years after a license revocation to be eligible to reapply. Number 8, it amends provisions applying to the renewal of licensure for an insurance agent to create corresponding penalty provisions when the required renewal application is not received by the commission by the agent's biennial renewal date. It amends Public Adjusters Licensing Act to add fingerprinting and criminal history record checks of applicants. Again, there were no amendments in committee. Don't anticipate any, but we know that could happen. Proponents were the Kansas Insurance Department, the Kansas Association of Insurance Agents, Advisors XL, IMA Financial Group, and written only testimony in favor were the American Council of Life Insurers, Kansas Association of Professional Insurance Agents, the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, National Association of Insurance and Financial Advisors in Kansas, and State Farm Insurance Companies. There were no opponents presented, and again, the fiscal note is $5,257,680. And we believe the bill is ready to be worked. I'll stand for questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Heiberger. Oh, who waves away? The chair recognizes Representative Neighbor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The carrier of the bill did an absolutely excellent breakdown of what is maintained in this bill. It is a good piece of legislation, and I would ask you to support it. I will also tell you that there is a companion bill Senate Bill 37 that has also been introduced in the Senate. So we're operating with the same information. So thank you very much, and I again ask for your support.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Berquist, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move that when the committee rises and reports, that it reports House Bill 2074 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Berquist to close HB 2074 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2001. For the purposes of carrying HB 2001, the chair recognizes Representative Owens.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's good to be back again, kind of doing the same thing a second time because we heard this same bill last year. But as we've heard many times, it didn't make it through the process due to the early termination of the legislature. House Bill 2001 is a judiciary bill. House Bill 2001 creates the crime of sexual extortion, which is defined as communicating by any means a threat to injure the property or reputation of a person, commit violence against a person, or distribute an image, video, or other recording of a person that is of a sexual nature or depicts such person in a state of nudity when the intent to coerce the person to engage in sexual conduct or anything of a sexual nature.
Representative, were there committee amendments?
My apologies. I move adoption of the committee report as amended.
You've heard the motion, belabored as it was. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, no.
My apologies for that lack of procedure, Mr. Chair.
The motion passes and committee report is adopted.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Well, I believe that I've said what needed to be said, and I will stand for questions at this time.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Theft of intellectual property is a crime. And somebody's intellectual property got stolen. I'm sorry, I must have missed the joke over there. Somebody's intellectual property got stolen in this bill, and the next one, because it's okay in the Kansas legislature to put your name on somebody else's idea. So, notwithstanding that sad circumstance, I urge your support for HB 2001. Thanks.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Owens, you may close.
There are so many things that could be said to follow that comment. However, I will refrain due to the importance of the decorum in this body. As I mentioned previously, this bill was passed 125-0 last year. And as such, Mr. Chair, I would move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports HB 2001 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Owens to report HB 2001 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. The next item of business is HB 2120. For the purpose of carrying HB 2120, the chair recognizes Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, I bring you today HB 2120 from the Judiciary Committee. HB 2120 would amend the definition of the crime of sexual battery to remove the element requiring the crime to be committed against a victim who is, quote, not the spouse of the offender. This bill would make a technical amendment to the definition of the crime of aggravated sexual battery in accordance with the change of the definition of sexual battery. The spousal exception for sexual battery is the last remaining spousal exception for a sexual crime Kansas has left on the books. In committee, we heard from several sexual assault and domestic violence organizations about the need to repeal this exception, stating that this bill would ensure that Kansans are protected against sexual violence in all domestic circumstances. With that, Mr. Chair, I will stand for any questions.
Does any member desire to speak to the bill? The chair recognizes Representative Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This legislation is long overdue, so I urge your support for HB 2120. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Representative Samsel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Very briefly, body, this was in the House last year. Full transparency, I was one of the 15 who voted against this bill. I will likely vote against it again this year. Questions that I had in committee were not satisfactorily answered to me by the proponents, which I'll address very briefly. So just for this body's information, if I were sitting in your shoes and not on the Committee on Judiciary, I would want to know this before I voted. I don't know that the bill here is ready for prime time, but in full disclosure, there were no opponents on this bill. And this is, my understanding, is the last of what used to be spousal exceptions in the law. But to me, it gets to what does the sanctity of marriage means. And I'm single, so I'm not the best person to speak to this. But when you do get married, what does that mean and what implied consent are you giving? My good friend from Wichita, I think, described it as a technical amendment, but my heartburn comes from the fact that I think there's actually some real-life practical implications here, that if we really do believe that marriage means something, that here's my real-life scenario here. When I read this language, it says that sexual battery is the touching of a victim, and then there used to be an exception so that this did not apply to spouses, so man and woman here in Kansas, but who is 16 years of age and who does not consent thereto, and I think consent's going to be the key here, but with the intent is to arouse or satisfy the sexual desires of the offender or another. So if you can imagine, after a long, hard day at work, and let's say wife or husband is already asleep, and then perhaps touches the spouse, hoping to arouse sexual desires, or perhaps it happens the next morning. But to me, I think if we change this law, a crime has been committed under the laws and the text of Kansas. And that doesn't mean that the prosecutor necessarily has to pursue it to the full extent of the law, but I do have concerns that this is raised, let's say maybe 1 time out of 100. And again, not to get into the weeds here, but we all know those very sad circumstances where marriages end badly, divorce, other situations. But not only are we saying this is now a misdemeanor, but under subsection B in this bill, it would also seemingly rise to aggravated sexual battery, which is a severity level 5 person felony. And I get that the burden would still be on the victim and the state, and they would still have to come in and prove beyond a reasonable doubt that is a criminal high standard as it should be. But my concern is that we are triggering ethical obligations for what would seemingly be a routine act between man and woman, and technically making that, and maybe not technically, I criticized my prior colleague for calling it a technical amendment, but I think that's a very serious thing worthy of discussion here. So perhaps it is time for the spousal exception to no longer be a thing in Kansas, but I don't know that the language of this bill satisfies underlying concerns, and perhaps this goes a little bit too far. So those are my current concerns. I applaud the efforts of the proponents. As I mentioned to them in committee, I think consent is an important thing. And in this particular circumstance here, when you sign up for marriage, what does that involve? Not just for the next day, but for hopefully 30 and 40 and 50 years to come. But there's a couple college students before COVID that came through last year, and instead of just no meaning no and trying to get that for consent, it was actually yes means yes. So those are discussions that I hope this body continues to have. I am not advocating or asking anybody to vote no on this. Certainly your conscience you will follow, but I did at least want to raise that for the body so they have that understanding before we vote today. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
The chair recognizes Representative Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was the original sponsor of this bill a couple years ago, and I just want to thank the good work of the Judiciary Committee, including the chairman, all the members on it, for continuing to take this up and advance it. I also just want to clarify something on here. This is not creating anything new in the law. It merely applies the law evenly across all relationships. So if the scenarios which were brought up by a previous speaker were taking place, we would be hearing of those issues with the law as it currently exists. There is a crime of sexual battery. This merely says that becoming married, entering a marriage relationship, does not eliminate the need for consent in sexual acts. So I want to clarify this. I know maybe technical bill, we might dispute whether that's the case, but this does not create anything new. It merely applies the law across all of those relationships. So what is now illegal in a committed relationship between two engaged people applies the same way if they are married. So all this would say is that marriage does not alleviate the need for consent. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
To speak for a second time, Representative Samsel.
Very briefly, body, I respect my colleague there. He's done excellent work. But this does create a new crime between man and woman, spouses. And I do agree with the previous speaker that there are laws on the books to already address this if there is lack of consent. And that's battery, it's aggravated battery, and other crimes for which they should be fully prosecuted under the law. And again, those are not perfect, but neither is taking out this exception in the law. So I just wanted to state for the record my disagreement with the good previous speaker. Thank you.
If there's no further discussion, Representative Hoheisel, you may close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Colleagues, let's vote yes on HB 2120, repeal this final spousal exception we have on the books, and send a message that a marriage certificate is not a license for an individual to sexually batter their spouse in any way. With that, Mr. Chair, I move that when the committee rises and reports, it reports House Bill 2120 favorably for passage.
You've heard the motion by Representative Hoheisel to report HB 2120 favorably. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Motion passes. This concludes our general orders. The chair recognizes the majority leader.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I move we rise and report.
You've heard the motion to rise and report. All in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, no. The motion passes.
The clerk will read the committee report.
Mr. Speaker, your committee of the whole recommends House Bills 2103, 2134, 2109, 2074, 2120, and Senate Bill 15 be passed. House Bills 2121, 2165, and 2001 be passed as amended.
Speaker recognizes Representative Sutton for a motion to adopt the committee of the whole report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the committee of the whole report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The committee report is adopted. Speaker recognizes the majority leader for a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to House Rule 2311, I move that an emergency be declared and that Senate Bill 15, House Bill 2103, House Bill 2134, House Bill 2109, House Bill 2121, House Bill 2165, House Bill 2074, House Bill 2001, and House Bill 2120 be advanced to that order of business final action on bills and concurrent resolutions.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. The motion passes. Emergency final action. Final action on bills and concurrent resolutions. The clerk will read.
Senate Bill Number 15 by the Committee on Financial Institutions, an act concerning financial institutions, enacting the Kansas Economic Recovery Loan Deposit Program, relating to credit unions, field of membership, banks, trust companies, and savings and loan institutions, privilege tax, deduction of net interest received from certain agricultural real estate loans and single-family residence loans.
This constitutes final action on Senate Bill 15. The clerk will open the roll, and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Bishop votes aye. Representative Jacobs votes aye. Representative Helgerson votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 122 having voted in favor and 1 against the passage of Senate Bill 15, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill Number 2103 by the Committee on Agriculture, an act concerning agriculture relating to environmental remediation, establishing the Kansas Pesticide Waste Disposal Program and the Kansas Pesticide Waste Disposal Fund, permitting annual transfers from the Kansas Agricultural Remediation Fund to the Kansas Pesticide Waste Disposal Fund.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2103. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Helgerson is an aye. Representative Stodgdale votes aye. Representative Orr votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2103, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill Number 2134 by the Committee on Insurance and Pensions, an act concerning insurance relating to the reinsurance of risk, updating the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Credit for Reinsurance Model Law, Insurance Holding Company Act, codifying the National Association of Insurance Commissioners Credit for Insurance Model Regulation.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2134. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Helgerson votes aye. Representative Bergquist votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2134, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2109 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning the Board of Indigent Defense Services relating to appointments to the board, increasing population threshold of a county required to have a lawyer member, increasing number of lawyer members, decreasing number of non-lawyer members.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2109. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Tim Johnson votes aye. Representative Delperdang votes nay. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 88 having voted in favor and 35 against the passage of House Bill 2109, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2121 by the Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to defendants who abscond from supervision, definitions.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2121. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Every member had an opportunity to record their vote. Representative Tim Johnson votes aye. Representative Bergquist votes aye. Representative Landwehr votes aye. Representative Helmer votes nay. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 101 having voted in favor and 22 against the passage of House Bill 2121, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2165 by the Committee on Transportation, an act concerning motor vehicles related to antique vehicles, providing that all vehicles that are more than 35 years old qualify as antique vehicles for registration purposes, eliminating references to street rod vehicles.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2165. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Stodgdale votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 114 having voted in favor and 9 against the passage of House Bill 2165, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2074 by the Committee on Insurance and Pensions, an act concerning insurance relating to producer licensing requirements, agent conduct pertaining to examinations, fees, renewal dates, suspension, revocation, or denial of licensure renewal.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2074. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Bishop votes aye. Representative Burrows votes aye. Representative Stephen Johnson votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none. 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2074, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will close the roll, or record the vote. Final action, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2001 by Representative Owens, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to sex offenses, creating the crime of sexual extortion, requiring registration of offenders.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2001. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their votes? Representative Awerkamp votes aye. Representative Stodgdale votes aye. Representative Stephen Johnson votes aye. Representative Carlson votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 123 having voted in favor and 0 against the passage of House Bill 2001, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Final action. Clerk will read.
House Bill number 2120 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to sex offenses, sexual battery, removal, spousal exception.
This constitutes final action on House Bill 2120. The clerk will open the roll and you may record your vote. Has every member had an opportunity to record their vote? Representative Schreiber votes aye. Representative French votes aye. The clerk will close the roll. Does any member desire to explain his or her vote? Representative Miller on an explanation of vote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had the great privilege of serving in this chamber the year that we made it illegal to rape your spouse. The contrast between that debate and today's debate, and I was not here last year when the bill was debated, but the contrast between then and now makes me very proud. Proud of this chamber, proud of our society, that we have made the strides in my lifetime that we have made about issues like these. I vote aye.
Are there any further explanations of vote? Does any member desire to change his or her vote? Seeing none, 110 having voted in favor and 13 against the passage of House Bill 2120, the same having received a constitutional majority, the bill is hereby declared passed. The clerk will record the vote. Reports of standing committees, the clerk will read.
Committee on Education recommends House Bill 2039 be reported without recommendation. Committee on Education recommends House Bill 25 be passed. Committee on Education recommends House Bill 2124 be passed. Committee on Agriculture recommends House Bill 2155 be passed. Committee on Calendar and Printing recommends on requests for resolutions and certificates that requests by Representatives Henderson, Cywert, Victors, Proctor, and Woodard be approved, and the Chief Clerk of the House be directed to order the printing of said certificates and the drafting of said resolutions.
Speaker recognizes Representative Hawkins for a motion to adopt the calendar and printing report.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move adoption of the calendar and printing report.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, nay. The ayes have it. The motion is adopted. Body, is there objection to returning to that order of business, introduction of bills and concurrent resolutions? Seeing none, the clerk will read.
House Bill number 2360 by the Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to crimes against persons, removing recklessly causing fear or evacuation, lockdown, or disruption in regular ongoing activities from the crime of criminal threat. House Bill number 2361 by the Committee on Corrections and Juvenile Justice, an act concerning courts relating to specialty courts, authorizing the Supreme Court to adopt rules related thereto, establishing the Specialty Court Funding Advisory Committee and the Specialty Court Resources Fund. House Bill number 2362 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, or criminal procedure relating to abuse of a child, modifying the elements of the offense, increasing criminal penalties thereof. House Bill number 2363 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning the Board of Indigent Defense Services relating to appointed counsel, authorizing the rate paid to appointed counsel to be higher than $80 per hour. House Bill number 2364 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, or criminal procedure relating to crimes against public morals, cruelty to animals, adding a definition of torturing. House Bill number 2365 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to controlled substances, providing immunity from prosecution for seeking medical assistance. House Bill number 2366 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning crimes, punishment, and criminal procedure relating to jailhouse witness testimony, requiring prosecutors to disclose their intent to introduce testimony from a jailhouse witness and to forward related information to the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. House Bill number 2367 by the Committee on Energy, Utilities, and Telecommunications, an act concerning the State Corporation Commission relating to public utilities, authorizing regulation of certain wire stringing activities. House Bill number 2368 by the Committee on Insurance and Pensions, an act concerning insurance relating to motor vehicle liability insurance, increasing the minimum policy limit for bodily injury. House Bill number 2369 by the Committee on Judiciary, an act concerning the Kansas Closed Case Task Force, relating to expiration of the task force, extending the task force, and providing for staff assistance. House Bill number 2370 by the Committee on Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development, an act concerning occupational licensure, relating to criminal convictions, prohibiting a conviction from disqualifying a person for licensure.
Announcements. Representative Trevor Jacobs will replace Representative Steve Hubert on the K-12 Education Budget Committee on Thursday, February 11th only. Representative Tom Sawyer will replace Representative Ponkawi Victors on the House Transportation and Public Safety Budget Committee Thursday, February 11th only. Representative Marilyn Poskin will replace Representative Ponkawi Victors on the House Transportation Committee Thursday, February 11th only. Speaker recognizes Representative Burrows for an announcement. That was recycling on the bottom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Wyandotte Johnson County delegation members, mindful next Thursday, the 18th, we will be hosted by the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce. Our guests will be presidents of the Greater Kansas City Chamber of Commerce, Joe Reardon, former mayor, CEO of Kansas City, Kansas. Your reservations for lunch will be Tuesday at the latest, so please look in your email from an email from me, but next Thursday, get it booked at noon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Arnberger.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Future Caucus, we will be having our meeting via Zoom on Monday at 11:30, so be on the lookout for a Zoom link. Thank you.
Representative Owsley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Body, I just wanted to bring your attention to the flyer on your desk today. The Labor and Working Families Caucus will have a lunch and learn on Monday. Our presenter will be Jan Fisher, an attorney speaking on the topic of workers' compensation. The Greater Kansas City Building and Trades will be our sponsor. Watch for an email with a Zoom link in it later today and instructions on how to order your lunch from Let Us Feed You. And if you can, please place your lunch orders in advance so we don't overwhelm them downstairs in the basement. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ralph.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Body, Rural Caucus will jump on and have a quick online meeting immediately upon adjournment. Thank you.
Representative Waymaster.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Appropriations Committee, we will be meeting tomorrow to get caught up on some of the budgets that we were not able to get through today. And those will be the budgets from the Social Services Budget Committee, Agriculture and Natural Resources, K-12 Education, and General Government Budget. So we'll be meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Speaker. May I, Speaker Pro Tem, thank you. For Democrats, we are still having Thursday Summit. Most of your lunches should be in your office. If not, we still have them in the minority office. So as soon as you can, we'll be on Zoom, and I will see you then, and we'll go from like 1 to 1:20 if that time will work for you as well. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Representative Bergquist.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. I would like to request the permission of the body to change my vote on House Bill 2109.
Body, this is a request that requires unanimous consent. So I will in a moment ask if there is objection. I would also note that it is a custom of this body to grant this courtesy to members provided that it is not too often requested. Is there objection to allowing Representative Bergquist to change his vote on House Bill 2109? Seeing none, we'll ask the clerk to correct that in the journal.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, and thank you, body.
Are there any further announcements? Seeing none, the Speaker would recognize Majority Leader Hawkins for a motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, body, for another successful day. Mr. Speaker, I move the House adjourn until Friday, February 12th at 8:30 a.m. pro forma.
You've heard the motion. All in favor signify by saying aye. All opposed, no. The ayes have it. The House stands adjourned.
We have to manually go out and change